Imagine this headline tomorrow. Government debt has been paid off. No more bonds, no more interest, no more deficits. Sounds like a happy ending. But in the real world, that headline is closer to a fire alarm. Because in modern finance, debt isn't just a bill. It's the thing the entire system is built on. And if it vanished overnight, the shock wouldn't feel like freedom. It would feel like the floor disappearing under your feet. So here's the real question. If debt can't realistically be repaid in full, how does the system keep operating decade after decade? The answer is not one solution. It's a playbook, a set of pressure valves the system uses to survive. There are 3 of them. And once you see them, you start spotting them everywhere, in every major crisis, in every reset, in every era. Let's name the uncomfortable truth. Every debt is someone else's asset. A government bond isn't just what the government owes. It's what banks use as collateral, what pensions rely on for stability, what insurers hold as reserves, what central banks treat as the anchor of the financial ocean. In other words, debt is not just a burden. Debt is the safest building block in the system. That's why eliminating debt doesn't remove weight. It removes support beams. Here's the mistake people make. They imagine governments repay debt like families repay a mortgage. But governments don't finish debt. They refinance it. Old bonds mature. New bonds replace them. That isn't a moral failure. It's a design feature. Because if the supply of safe assets suddenly shrank, the financial system wouldn't become healthier. It would become hungrier. And when it gets hungry, it sells everything that isn't nailed down. So the system doesn't aim for debt-free. It aims for debt that stays believable. When debt grows too heavy, the system doesn't try to erase it. It tries to do something much more specific. Reduce the burden without breaking trust. Not remove the number. Change what the number means. And that brings us to the 3 survival mechanisms. Inflation is the system's quietest tool. It doesn't default on the debt. It doesn't announce a reset. It simply changes the measuring stick. If your country owes $1 trillion and the currency loses purchasing power over time, that trillion becomes easier to carry. Same number, smaller weight. Inflation is basically a haircut nobody signs. And that's why it's so politically useful. It doesn't look like a decision. It looks like life got expensive. But here's the trade-off. And it's not subtle. Inflation transfers value away from people who save in cash and toward people who hold assets and debt. It's a pressure valve, not a cure. Now, if inflation is the quiet option, what happens when inflation becomes too painful, too obvious, or politically impossible? That's when the system reaches for the second tool. Restructuring is when the system admits something without saying it out loud. It says, "We're not breaking the promise. We're just rewriting the terms." That can mean extending maturities, lowering interest rates, temporary payment holidays, swapping into different instruments, partial write-downs. This is what happens when the numbers still exist on paper. But the cash flow doesn't exist in reality. The key thing to understand is this. Restructuring isn't the end of the story. It's the bridge. A way to keep the machine running long enough to avoid a full collapse. And it often comes with conditions. Because if someone restructures your debt, they also restructure your choices. But inflation and restructuring have a limit. Because both rely on one fragile ingredient, trust in the currency. When trust breaks, the system needs something larger than policy tweaks. It needs a new rule book. This is the big one. Monetary regime change. It's the moment the system stops pretending the old framework still works. Sometimes it's loud. Abandoning a peg, imposing capital controls, reorganizing banks, introducing new instruments, rewriting how money is created and distributed. Sometimes it's quiet. A slow shift in what money is and who the world trusts to hold it. This is where history becomes brutally consistent. Empires don't usually fall because they lose one battle. They weaken because they overextend financially. and eventually the monetary structure can't carry the promises anymore. Then the regime changes, not as a choice, as a consequence. So if debt can't be repaid, how does the system survive? It keeps doing what it has always done. Inflate the burden away when it can, restructure when it must, change the regime when trust breaks. And notice what all three have in common. Debt doesn't disappear. Debt transforms, because debt isn't a glitch in the system. Debt is the mechanism the system uses to keep moving forward. Now comes the real question. Which of these three mechanisms is most likely next? Are we heading into a long, slow inflation era, a wave of restructuring, or a deeper monetary regime shift? In the next video, we'll map the signals, the exact indicators that tend to appear right before major monetary resets. Not predictions, patterns.